Hey, and welcome back. What are the three biggest, most secret developments of World War II? Well, I think we'd all put the atomic bomb as number one, radar as number two, but what's number three? Good question. Well, stay tuned and you're going to learn about a program that cost $1 billion US and over 22 million of these devices were made, and both Winston Churchill and General Patton said, without this secret weapon, we would have not won World War II. So, welcome back to another episode of Secret Science. So in the last film I did a little thing about World War II secrets, and it was very much based on a lecture given by Steve Blank in Silicon Valley. Steve watched the film and liked it, thank you Steve, and hi, and sent me some amazing new information that I'd not seen on the proximity fuse. And the proximity fuse is the answer to what was the third biggest, most expensive and important science development of World War II. This is why.
The simplest form of artillery or bomb fuses explode their carriers after impact with the target. But this method of detonation has been found to be ineffective when firing at enemy soldiers hidden in trenches, or when airplanes are engaged with heavy anti-aircraft shells or rockets. These targets could be engaged more effectively if the projectile would explode when it came close. If the fuse could know when it was within damaging distance of the target.
Okay, I'm going to set you a challenge. It's 1939, and you have to build a proximity fuse. We know we want a cannon shell that will explode when it's near in proximity to its target, say an airplane. Hang on, it is 1939 and you don't have the transistor and you actually don't have a decent battery. So what are you going to build these fuses out of? Good question. Well, this came to be answered by Dr. Tuve at Johns Hopkins University. He imagined a fuse that would emanate lobes of radio waves.
Once in flight, the fuse sends out radio waves, which are its feelers, continually probing the space around the shell in search of a suitable target.
When one of these lobes passes the target, it sends a reflected signal back to the little fuse, and by kind of Doppler shift, it triggers a capacitor, holds the charge of electricity, which detonates the bomb. Bang! Good idea.
When the shell passes close to a target, such as an airplane, the radio waves are reflected back to the fuse, where they trigger a firing circuit and explode the projectile. The same system may be applied to targets on the ground. In this case, the earth acts as the reflector, and the projectile is exploded in such a position that the spray of deadly fragments envelops the target.
But how are you going to build one of these things? So you've got glass vacuum tubes and pretty bad dry cell batteries. So let's talk first of all about the challenge of the glass vacuum tube.
The VT fuse was created by cramming a complete radio sending and receiving set into a tiny space in the nose of a shell or bomb. The radio is turned on only after the projectile has started on its last deadly mission. And artillerymen pounded German and Japanese ground troops continually with VT barrages. The German soldiers promptly nicknamed it Hellfire, a perfect description of this weapon, this truly great achievement of our scientific and industrial organizations.
When you fire a shell, it produces 22,000 G force on the projectile. It also leaves the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, so it's pretty fast. And it's rotating due to the rifling, spiraling inside the gun barrel at 25,000 RPM. So basically your fuse is being blasted, it's hot, and it's rotating. I mean, and it's made of glass. Good luck. So they experimented with making the vacuum tubes that produces the radio signal that triggers the fuse out of special glass. And there we can thank the British glassmakers who come up with some amazingly strong glass. And today we use it now on the front face of our mobile phone. So that's a definite development that came out of World War II to make VT fuses vacuum tubes. Good one, Pilkingtons. So they built a pretty tough tube and they potted it, meaning it was encased in, pretty strong stuff, and they test fired it and they had a massive problem. Let's go over some of the problems that they had. Okay, so it leaves the gun and you're in this kind of French town and you're firing near the cathedral. Well, it's going to go past the cathedral spire and explode long before it hits the plane. Oh, so proximity, yeah, but only proximity to what we want to hit, not like the tree or leaving the muzzle of the gun even was a problem. So they come up with a delay, a time delay. And I'm still looking for this footage. If it exists, please send me a link. So when you fire an artillery shell with one of these proximity fuses, it leaves the gun, and when the fuse activates, it lets out a little puff of smoke to show that the fuse is now active, and then it carries on up and hopefully explodes near and destroying the aircraft. Jolly good. Now the second problem is the battery. A lot of these fuses, and you're talking literally millions were made, had to be stored, and with a dry cell battery, how's that going to work? Especially in, like, say, the hold of a damp ship in the Pacific fighting the Japanese. So they came up with two incredibly clever inventions. First of all, they made a battery that had an ampule of electrolyte, that when poof, it exploded out of the gun, it burst the ampule, soaking the battery in the electrolyte and then activating the electricity, which made the radio waves, which activated the fuse. Yeah, so that was one development. And then the second one was they found that because it was rotating due to the rifling of the gun at 25,000 RPM, they could use the rotation as a generator. So inside, and it made electricity, which powered the fuse, got near the plane and exploded. Whoa! Great development number two.
The tiny radio sets and their delicate components had to be made strong enough to operate properly after being fired from a gun. That adequate sources of electrical power had to be developed. That safety devices had to be designed and had to be proven to be truly safe.
I have to tell you, just in Cincinnati, there was over 10,000 people working on these fuses, and in 1944 it cost them $450 million to produce enough fuses to keep the Army, Air Force and Navy in proximity fuses. It's a massive and very secret program. And there were other problems. One of the issues that worried the British is if you fired the shell and it totally missed the target, it was outside the proximity of the proximity fuse, and it just landed and didn't go off, this perfect, preserved, secret technology could be picked up by the enemy. So, using British watchmaking skills, they added yet another layer to this miniaturized fuse on the top of a shell. Incredible. Oh, and by the way, British shell diameters were different from Americans, so there was a British and American version of proximity fuses, but the British ones had a clockwork timer that would detonate the bomb if it hadn't gone off, so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. This was very expensive, and also I slightly worry, you got all these shells being fired, they don't actually hit anything. So they were used to shoot down V1s over London. Okay, so they missed, which I'm sure a lot did, and it would just like fall into Crystal Palace Park, and then it would explode. Anyway, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. So in 1944, they needed so many, and they just dropped the whole worry about them falling into enemy hands and removed the detonator for duds.
Due to security, general use of VT over land did not begin until December 1944, when field howitzers firing VT-fused shells were thrown into the now famous Battle of the Bulge. Barrages of bursting shells such as these took the Germans completely by surprise and annihilated some of von Rundstedt's crack battalions.
This is probably my favorite fact about proximity fuses. So one of the other great worries of these fuses that were producing a radio signal of a certain frequency, fired up, explode when they got near something, was that radio signal could be jammed if the enemy knew what frequency the proximity fuse was using. And in fact, in the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans actually had a radio jamming device that never worked against the Allies' proximity fuses. Why didn't it work? The solution is a bit like the counterintuitive brilliance of how train brakes work. The first idea was to blow pressurized steam down pipes through all the carriages and squeeze the brakes onto the wheel. Of course, if the pipe ever broke, you lost the pressure and you lost your braking. So turn it on its head, and this often works for you. Instead of blowing, they sucked. So the brakes were always on, and then a vacuum system sucks the brakes, sucks the brakes off. If the pipe ever breaks, boom, the brakes are applied automatically. Brilliant. So what did they do that was similar to that system for the proximity fuse? This is the answer. We talked about the shells leaving the muzzle of the gun with rifling at over 25,000 RPM, and that was how they solved the frequency problem. What they did is use that rotation to drive a generator that produced the frequency of the radio waves that came out. And of course, they're always slightly different. There'd be a range, but you can't jam them because, I mean, imagine firing a shell to a long distance, say to hit a plane at, say, 60,000 feet. By the time it gets up to 60,000 feet, the spin would have slowed down just a little bit. So the radio frequency was always changing, but it didn't mind because it was just looking for an echo return. So there was no single frequency. Genius. So as you can guess, I love these kind of stories. I really didn't know that the proximity fuse was the third most secret and most expensive science development of World War II. Now I do. Shared it with you, so hopefully now we all know that the truth is out there.